Hello once again, everyone. Thank you all for joining me here. As always, I am the much beloved and much imitable Jay, so sit back and relax as I tell you what I've been reading this time. So first and foremost, I want to apologize for the delay in between the previous two videos that I did. I don't want to get too into detail about it, but suffice to say, a whole bunch of stuff happened in real life that delayed my ability to actually sit down and work on this. Because of this, I've decided to stray away from discussing single issues of ongoing books, since now by this point I'm so far behind it's not really worth it to do so. Anyways, hope you all had pleasant times during the holidays. I'm sure for those of you whose only personality trait is bitching on the internet about when your family member says something that mildly offends you had a difficult time, well, with corona rareness causing a lot of people to not do anything major for the holidays. But I had a good time, and that's all that matters to me. Speaking of good times, it's a bit hard to believe how fast it felt like the rest of the issues came out for this series. Maybe it's because I had the time to be able to devote thinking about other things since I wasn't working on doing a review on the other three one by one. I forgot when it was coming out. Which is actually rather fitting since it barely feels like this was supposed to be the final issue. Last time, we left off with Ultraman and Shin merging together with a warning that the process was unstable, while Kiki went off to interrogate Dr. Yamamoto about Project Starlight, the giant super space laser the USP had stashed away. The story from there picks up with Shin, now semi-inducted as an agent of the USP, heading off to go find Kiki. The series starts to backpedal somewhat on the shadiness of the USP at this point, although they still stick with it up until the end. Ichi Natani, the USP's chief, is shown to be an overall fairly honest guy who's willing to believe but not blindly accept Shin when he says that Ultraman wasn't hostile. Meanwhile, Yamamoto is the polar opposite, being shown as a completely deranged crackpot whose house is crawling with kaiju, screaming and berating Kiki for things she doesn't even begin to have time to comprehend. We get our first major kaiju fight here as well, with Shin and Ichi Natani heading to go bail out Kiki, arriving just in time to keep her from getting mauled to death by a Naranga. The 3-minute time limit is kept here, although naturally in a comic it really serves no purpose. Nonetheless, it's appreciated that it was kept in, although there's an additional aspect brought up that, as mentioned, the duo's merge isn't full and using Ultraman's power slowly weakens the bond, Ultraman implying that if it breaks they both might die. This doesn't end up going anywhere by the end, but it's an interesting aspect that puts on an additional risk factor for the fights. The fight itself is pretty well done here, and Ultraman's usual fighting style is well replicated by the comic. Being done at normal size is neat as well. Ultraman doesn't do many human-sized fights often, so it's always a treat seeing it happen. There's also an added incentive to actually bother with fighting the kaiju, as Ultraman explains that kaiju imprint on people at random when they cross over into reality, and will continue to track them down until one or both are dead. I like this as a concept, and it's a neat way to explain the usual victim of the week plot that's so prevalent in Tokusatsu, and it's rare to see anything ever acknowledge it even as a concept at all. Ultraman ends up blasting the Naranga to bits, and Shin tries to escape with Kiki and Yamamoto in tow. But unfortunately for everyone, Yamamoto decides to be a bit of a bitch about it and blasts Kiki with one of the K-rays. Luckily she's fine, sort of, as Yamamoto reveals that the grand conspiracy he's been hiding from and ranting about is that the mysterious energy source of the USP's attack is actually a secret pocket dimension, and that the kaiju are not destroyed by the rays, but teleported there instead. Ultraman explains that this is Limbo dimension was created by the Ultras as a storage for kaiju before they got carted off to the monster graveyard. But they abandoned it because, unsurprisingly, a giant monster storage pit has pretty bad security in terms of keeping the monsters in, and is overall just kind of a bad idea. Also unsurprisingly, this is exactly what the USP's been using it for this whole time, and it's about to explode and send all the kaiju back into the real world. Conceptually, I like this idea, but it's not explored enough to really be fully fleshed out beyond the vague concept of it. It does serve for some nice visuals though, with Kiki and Ultraman fighting through the floating chunks of buildings and debris scattered throughout Limbo. They also start backpedaling on the USP more here too, with Ichi Natani explaining that he was aware of the fact that fear of kaiju leads to the attraction of more kaiju, and with the advancement of technology leading to news spreading far faster than it once did, it makes it all necessary to keep it all cloak and dagger and secret and all that. Granted, he still gets called out for sitting on his ass for years and years and years doing absolutely nothing about the giant kaiju storage pit, but Yamamoto, again the hollowing crackpot, doesn't really seem to have any kind of idea for a backup plan either. So, Ultraman travels into Limbo and is able to save Kiki from getting mauled to death by Gamora, and they're able to pop back out and the day is saved. And then Bemular shows up. Oops. Ultraman grows to full size and we get our first proper kaiju fight, and it is excellent. As mentioned prior, the comic does a great job at replicating Ultraman's fighting style, and it's a very exciting fight too. The comic starts dumping backstory at this point though, as Kiki explains that this is the same Bemular from the Ultra Q segment in issue 1, and that it's why the USP exists at all, and that it was their fears that spawned it, and yada yada yada, who cares, I just want to see Ultraman punch him already. And punch him he does, until Yamamoto decides to try and team kill Ultraman because he's an insane person and wants Bemular to wipe out the city, until he suddenly decides he doesn't want to and helps Ultraman to destroy Bemular and save the day. Shin becomes an agent of the USP, Ultraman and the USP become public knowledge, and Shin and Ultraman decide that the best way to solve the Kaiju Vault crisis is by popping open the vault in such a way that it spreads out the Kaiju across the world rather than immediately on top of them all at once, imprinting them onto the duo and keeping the greater society safe by dealing with the Kaiju in the open, with Ultraman becoming the public face and hope and safety as the series comes to a close. Or does it? As we get a last-second tease of none other than Dan Moriboshi, washing up in New Zealand, barely changed since the 60s, and seemingly no memories of what's happened since. The promise that the adventures of Ultraman will continue in a new series, The Trials of Ultraman. So hard to call this a finale, per se, but I like the ending as a setup for more, and I think it turned out pretty well overall. The pacing is still all screwed up, unfortunately, but whether that was them not knowing that they'd get more until it was too late, or overall laziness, I can't say. I'm curious to see what the ending would have been had it not gotten a continuation, since they rushed through so much stuff that anything they did would have just felt weird. I feel like either way, one more issue would have done the series some benefit, since there's just too much they try to cram into what they have, it just feels weird. I don't know how many issues Trial will have at the moment I'm making this, but hopefully they manage to flesh out everything more, since as it is, there's a lot of ideas wasted here. That being said, I solidly recommend the series as a whole. The art is gorgeous, and the takes on the lore and elements of the Ultra franchise are unique and interesting. I really enjoyed Shin, and his dynamic with Ultraman was solid, but the rest of the cast was pretty mixed. I enjoyed Kiki and thought she was a great foil for Shin, but everybody else feels a bit one-note. Ichinotani is probably the most well-rounded of the side cast otherwise, but he gets so little time overall in the series, it's hard to say much about him at all. I still definitely have issues with how much everything gets front-loaded and how quickly everything moves, as well with certain elements like the Ultra Q B-plot being cut completely after issue 1. And I hope they either come back to that or expand on it in the next part of the series. Personally, I'm going to wait until Trials comes out to really give a solid recommendation on this, but I didn't hate Rise. Maybe not a good read for non-Ultra fans, but I think that's an obvious statement, let's just be honest here. The team they got to work on it did great work, and I'm excited to see them improve on what they've presented already. I like the question. I'm a big fan of mysteries and conspiracy stories. The story of a lone detective dealing with some grand criminal conspiracy is very entertaining to me. I like the question conceptually, too. A journalist who acts as a vigilante to expose the stories he himself writes about. It's a very fun idea. Plus, it doesn't hurt that the question is almost always the best character anytime he shows up in any story or an adaptation or what have you. So, did I like the deaths of Vic Sage? So, quick overview of the story. Our valiant hero, Vic Sage, while dealing with an expose on one of the many shady people that run Hub City, he uncovers a link to an ancient secret society, leading him through a trippy journey through his own memories, linking his past lives together to uncover the truth behind an ancient and mysterious evil. First off, concept-wise, I think this was very interesting, but I wish a bit more was done with it. The idea itself is pretty interesting, taking a character that we're familiar with and presenting us a multitude of alternate versions of them, all different but still recognizable as the same character, using them to tell a single ongoing story with far-reaching consequences. But we only get the 3 different versions, and their stories are mostly unconnected. Our first of the Vics is in present day, the normal question essentially, and serves as our framing device, and he's largely the classic question as we all know and love him. There's also Vic in the Wild West as a blacksmith and an ex-soldier, and Vic as a private detective during World War II. Each has their own narrative, touching on the same theme of violence and societal unrest, present in Western Vic through the lens of racism and an unjust legal system, while World War II Vic deals with the unionization of workers and general corporate scumminess. Again, I really like this idea, having the different questions all going up against the problems of their respective eras. But even then, it's not handled very well, with both the modern and World War II parts essentially just using it as a set dressing for the actual plot. That and the Western segment and the modern segment having exactly the same topic feels a little bit lazy to me. The actual main plot itself is fine, and I think could have worked well even without the past lives, alternate history, whatever subplots. As it is, the alternative lives don't really tie in together much at all. Their stories may as well be standalone since there's very little that ends up tying them together. When they are tied together, however, I think it's really interesting since you've got the Vics having flashes of their past and or future lives, or them gaining memories or abilities of one of the others. And I liked that idea of the different lives bleeding together through time, leading to a jumbled train wreck of different conflicting, yet connected thoughts and memories and all that. Works really great for a mystery plot. But again, it's mostly just used in brief splashes and doesn't really contribute much beyond an excuse for cool visuals. Thematically, it's appropriate, but as a part of the greater work, it feels wasted. As for the characters, or character, I guess, I really liked the different Vics. They're all different from each other enough to stand out while still being recognizable as the same person. Modern Vic is pretty much the question as you would expect him, so there's not a whole lot to talk about him in regards to that. He may be a self-centered asshole, but really that's what makes him fun. Western Vic is the most interesting of the bunch, a former soldier who took part in the Comanche campaigns of the post-Civil War era, who became disillusioned with society afterwards and became a blacksmith in some podunk town in the middle of nowhere. I like that it's a reasonable setup for his motives, having him be willing to risk his own life to help someone he barely knows who is unjustly accused as a racist scapegoat. However, he ends up being fairly boring, as while he provides the most progression to the overall plot, his actual involvement with it is pretty minimal since most of what happens beyond him trying to save the aforementioned guy from a racist mob just happens to him and he really has no involvement in it overall. Inversely, World War II Vic is a pretty uninteresting character, being largely the typical noir detective type character you've seen done 100 times before this. But I think because of that, he is the most entertaining one of the group. He's honest and genuinely wants to help and solve the case he's given, but he's also a real wise-ass as well. And it carries the noir tone well, and honestly I wish that there was more of it. Again, in an inverse of the Western plot, we get the least amount of actual plot progression, as basically everything that furthers the overall plot is dumped in the last 2 pages. The only other recurring character is the villain, who is more just an abstract force of evil that exists to thrive on suffering and hate, and may or may not be Satan himself, it's not entirely clear. Now again, I like this idea for the character, this omnipresent, malignant force of hate slowly fanning the flames of society in the background to... Actually, why exactly does he do that? They never give the entity any kind of motivation for why it does what it does beyond because it is evil with a capital E and nothing more. Which, to be fair, is not inherently bad. It's perfectly fine to have a story where you don't explain every single detail about your antagonistic force. But in a mystery, it just feels like a cop-out. Then again, the metaphysical, omnipresent, supernatural threat doesn't really work in a straight mystery either, so there's that. I think that there's a lot of potential that the book has that just doesn't get utilized to its fullest here. It's a shame because I did enjoy reading it. I think it's fine, but it just makes me disappointed that it could have been so much better than it is. I like the take on question and the overall plot is interesting, but there's just too much left unanswered and the bulk of the series focuses on plots that are overall unrelated to the main story. Again, had it been more of like an Elseworld style showcase of alternate universe versions of questions, I think it would have been better. I will say that the art is fantastic here. It's got a very deliberately rough quality to it, using a lot of very simple line work combined with stellar use of shading and colors to make it really pop and give it a very unique and chaotic style that really goes well with the story. It stands out as the major highlight of the series. As well, I think the ending is very good too, although I won't say much without spoiling it directly. I think it works well for the themes they establish. It's open-ended, but it doesn't make you feel like you're missing anything or that it got cut short. I would say it's a decent read, but not really worth spending money on. Although I personally don't feel like my money was wasted on it, I also don't think I would have bought it had I read it all beforehand. Endless Winter, aka Holy Shit, how the fuck is death metal still not over yet? is yet another in a long line of filler cross-title storylines in which a thing shows up and everybody has to work together to stop the thing from doing something bad. Hey, that's about as much effort as the writers give. I really only bothered to pick up the first part since Flash got shoehorned into this nonsense, so I figured, okay, might as well see what the fuck is happening here so I'm not completely lost. And sitting here looking over the issues again, I struggle to think of what exactly drew me to decide to read the entire thing. Was there an interesting premise, or takes on characters that seemed fresh and exciting? Was it a particular writer I enjoyed being involved in wanting to see what they put out? Maybe it's because there was a promise that would become important later on down the line and I wanted to get on the train now so I wasn't confused. Or maybe it's because I saw Black Adam had a major role and I'm a major simp who will buy anything that they slap his face onto. Who can truly say? It's probably that last one though. Anyways, quick recap on the overall plot. Comically evil corporate douchebag Sebastian Stagg starts digging around in the ruins of the Fortress of Solitude and finds a bunch of supercharged ice crystals or some shit, the excavation of which accidentally awakens an ancient warrior with ice powers calling himself the Frost King, who uses his powers to plunge the world into an ever-worsening blizzard because of reasons. See, this is one of those mini-events that's hard to talk about because basically every issue serves no purpose at all. Of the 9 issues, only 3 have any degree of major significance, although 2 others have a small degree that come up near the end, but you didn't really need to have the full issue to convey what they have important. But of course, they still make you read the entire thing anyways, because the main part of the plot, that being the main villain's entire backstory and motivation, are told via brief flashback segments at the front of each issue. And I actually think the backstory parts are pretty interesting. Frost King himself is a rather generic villain, a man with strange powers who lost control trying to protect his family and accidentally plunging the world into an endless winter. This led to a team of Queen Hippolyta, Black Adam, the Viking Prince, and for some reason Swamp Thing, teaming up to defeat him and imprisoning him in the Arctic. I like the concept of having a story set in the past and using a cast of heroes analogous to those from the present day banding together to face some threat. It's a fun concept and I would have liked to see a whole story just like that. Splitting the story up to multiple issues makes it a bit of a slog to read through though. I wish they had just told all of it in a single issue. And again, most of the issues serve no purpose to the greater whole. Flash's issue, he gets beat up by some ice monsters and Black Adam has to bail him out. Superman's, he goes to see his parents? Most of them could have been cut completely and the overarching story would be no different. I don't care about the Titans doing community service or whatever the hell Detective Chimp is doing in the Hall of Justice by himself. And quite frankly, can't say I would ever want to know what he does when he's alone. And it all feels like filler in a story that's already borderline filler as it is. Because each issue is pretty standalone, there's not much of an overarching plot beyond, we gotta stop the Frost King or else we'll all freeze to death. But the Justice League basically spend the whole time dicking about doing nothing of major consequence the entire time. This leads to a somewhat forced overarching theme of family and togetherness with each of the heroes that pop up. And as a Christmas time story, it's fine and it works on certain aspects for certain characters, but others it feels forced. I like Green Lanterns, where he gets mopey because he's basically alone and has no one to keep him company during the holidays. And I also really like the stuff with Aquaman and his wife and his kid as well. But again, their stories are largely disconnected from the grand scheme of things, which makes everything feel like it's wasting your time. Really, the only one who has any major impact is Black Adam, who's largely in the background wrecking shit with a team of villains he cobbled together of Multiplex, Rampage, Icicle, and Catman. Weird that Catman showed up twice in a row on the show. And actually trying to track down the Frost King and stop what's been going on. Honestly, I just kinda wish he was the main character the entire time, but nah, well. On the upside, I think the visual design throughout is great. I'm a big fan of the wintertime and snowy environments, so it being entirely in a snowstorm is pretty nice. Seeing the familiar settings of the DC universe abandoned and blanketed in snow, it's weirdly comfy. Some missed opportunities seeing the heroes get winter versions of their suits though. Other than Batman, the only one who gets anything more than like a scarf is Wonder Woman, and even then they saved that for the last issue. Pretty much as expected, this was largely a pointless storyline. I think if this was reduced down to a one-shot or maybe like 2 or 3 issues max, I think it would have flown much better, but even then it would have been largely forgettable. The overarching plot is bare bones and the themes feel forced even at the best moments, but I don't think it's bad or anything, it's just kind of a waste of time. I think the best way to put it is, it's about family, and that's what's important. Also, the ending sets up Black Adam planning something particularly crazy, which I'm excited to see go absolutely nowhere and get forgotten about because of Future State. Well, that just about wraps up this episode. Thanks for sticking around, and be sure to come back next time to find out what else I've been reading.